That sounds fine. I'm going to read Shelby's welcoming comments here, just in case any of this is helpful to all of you. Welcome to DCED HUD grantees to today's training. I'm speaking on behalf of Shelby Splain, the Pennsylvania SHPO's Education and Outreach Coordinator. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. We are recording the webinar, so don't worry if there's anything you've missed. We will share the link to the recording on YouTube so you can save it and refer to it often. If you are calling in or having trouble with your internet connection, I've shared the slides with you via email, and you can follow along in that way if necessary. We are using the chat function to manage questions today. The chat box can be opened by clicking the speech bubble icon at the bottom left of your screen. Simply type your question in the box and hit enter. Please send us your questions as they occur to you, and Shelby will read through them when we take our question breaks throughout the presentation. You can also communicate any questions about using Skype for Business with Shelby in the chat box. Please keep in mind that the chat conversation is a visible part of the recording. And with that, it's time for me. Would you advance the slide, Barbara? Thank you. Good morning, everyone. This is Pamela Riley, Historic Preservation Specialist with the Pennsylvania State Historic Preservation Office. As many of you know, I was formerly part of the DCED staff dedicated to assisting HUD grantees with the Section 106 review. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and thanks to Shelby for all of her communications expertise. Our computers are proving especially feisty today, so I'll apologize in advance in case anything doesn't quite work the way we'd hoped. The purpose of today's training is to provide guidance on the consulting party coordination process, which is a key part of Section 106 compliance. Joining us today are Barbara Frederick, the State Historic Preservation Office Environmental Review Supervisor, and Christine Howell, the Environmental Review Officer for DCED. The photo on the previous slide was the Cadillac Building in beautiful Bellefonte, Centre County. It's an example of a project where consulting parties played a useful role in the 106 process. Let's get back to the agenda now. Today, we will be providing information on all aspects of the consulting party coordination process. We will be discussing the what, why, and when of consulting party coordination, the role of consulting parties in the Section 106 process, common consulting parties for DCED HUD-sponsored projects, how to solicit consulting party feedback and responses, how to conduct consulting party meetings, and the timeframes for consulting party coordination. The National Historic Preservation Act recognizes historic preservation as serving the public interest. The intent behind the Section 106 consultation process is to ensure that there is adequate consideration of historic preservation interests in federal project planning. The regulations to implement the federal law are found in 36 CFR Part 800. The federal agency or those acting on its behalf, such as a DCED grantee accepting HUD funds, is responsible for consultation. The definition provided on this slide is taken from the federal regulations and is very straightforward. Consultation is the process of seeking, discussing, and considering the views of others with an interest in the project. The goal of consultation is to find a mutually acceptable resolution, to seek agreement on any issues raised in the process. Let's go over the basics of consulting party coordination. Federal agencies, or those acting on their behalf, have a number of legally mandated responsibilities, including compliance with Section 106. The purpose of Section 106 is to make sure that the federal agencies take into account the effect of all federally sponsored projects on historic properties and give the public and consulting parties an opportunity to offer comments in the planning process. Consultation with consulting parties is how federal agencies satisfy that legal requirement. The SHPO is always a consulting party with the federal agency for federal projects. Local individuals or organizations with a demonstrated economic, legal, or historic preservation interest in the project may also participate. It is the responsibility of the federal agency to identify and invite possible consulting parties to participate. So the consultation process includes solicitation of local groups to participate as a consulting party, communication with the SHPO and all consulting parties to discuss the project, identify historic properties in the project area, assess the project's effect on historic properties, and finally, to resolve an adverse effect through the creation of a mitigation agreement if needed. The consultation should happen as early in the decision-making process as possible so as not to preclude the consideration of project alternatives offered by consulting parties. Project consultation is most effective and least stressful when undertaken early in the process when more project options are possible. The federal agency can document satisfaction of the consultation process by providing a written record of actions taken, including requests for consulting party participation and notes from meetings where consulting party feedback was sought and considered. The 4 steps of the Section 106 process are shown in this illustration. As you can see, consultation is needed to satisfy the requirements of Section 106 and can occur at any step in the process. Consultation with the PA SHPO occurs at every step until the project is resolved. Depending upon the size and scope of the project, federal agencies may also request participation of local consulting parties to identify historic properties located in the project's area of potential effect, to assess effects, and if the project's effect is adverse, to resolve adverse effects through consulting party meetings and the development of an agreement. The SHPO will request and require documentation of the effort to identify consulting parties when the project has the potential to cause an adverse effect on historic properties. Please note that the required HUD public notification process does not satisfy the need to seek out specific consulting parties for a particular project with an adverse effect on historic properties. So who are the participants in the Section 106 consultation process? The federal agency, applicant, SHPO, local government, and the ACHP, the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, all shown in blue on this slide, are by right consulting parties who have the right to participate by law. The ACHP must be notified if there is the potential for an adverse effect and given a chance to comment. In most circumstances, the ACHP does not choose to participate in consultation unless the project involves a landmark or is the subject of great public interest and controversy. But remember that notification of the ACHP is always required when the federal project has an adverse effect finding. Invited participants include those organizations or individuals who have a historic preservation, legal, or economic interest in the project. They might include local historic preservation groups or neighborhood groups, adjacent property owners, and regional heritage or tourism groups. Main Street or Elm Street organizations or downtown merchants groups might also choose to share an opinion. The federal agency is required to make an effort to identify invited consulting parties. In some situations, invited participants do not choose to consult, and only the SHPO and the federal agency or grant recipient and local government act as consulting parties for the project. There is no requirement that additional invited participants consult. but there must be documentation of the federal agency's efforts to provide that opportunity for public input and involvement when the project has the potential to cause an adverse effect. This documentation can be as simple as a letter or email to identified possible local participants copied to the Pennsylvania SHPO. Sometimes potential consulting parties may reach out to the federal agency or the SHPO requesting an invitation to participate in the Section 106 consultation process. While the SHPO can offer guidance and assistance, it is always the federal agency's role to coordinate the consultation process and issue invitations. The SHPO will request documentation of consulting party coordination when a proposed project under review could have an adverse effect on historic properties. This historic building on Cameron Street in Harrisburg has been vacant and neglected for many years. Despite its deteriorated condition, it was recently determined eligible for the National Register due to its historic use as the hub of the city's streetcar and trolley system and its distinctive architecture. If demolition is proposed using federal funds, the SHPO would consider the project to have the potential for an adverse effect, and efforts to identify and meet with consulting parties would need to be undertaken and documented. Poor condition does not mean that the federal agency does not need to complete the consultation process, including seeking local consulting parties. If the property is eligible for or listed in the National Register, either individually or as a contributing building in a historic district, and an adverse effect is possible, then consultation is needed and consulting party coordination must be documented. Many DCED HUD grantees have undertaken projects which require consulting party coordination. In the project shown on this slide, 2 contributing buildings in the National Register listed Carlisle Historic District were proposed for demolition and new construction using HUD home funds. While the 2 houses were in poor condition due to vandalism and fire damage, their removal still resulted in an adverse effect finding on the historic district. New construction in a historic district, even without demolition of contributing buildings, could also cause an adverse effect on the district if the new buildings will be much different in size, scale, setback, or materials. A high-rise tower proposed in a streetscape of 2-story houses would be an example, or a 1-story new building with a front parking lot proposed for a dense commercial block of 3-story buildings with a short setback from the sidewalk would also be a project with the potential to affect a historic district. For the demolition and new construction projects shown here, the grant recipient acted as the federal agency coordinating the consulting party process. Conference calls were held to discuss the project, weigh alternatives, and agree on appropriate mitigation. While there were no objections to the demolition given the fire damaged condition of the buildings and their location at the very edge of the historic district, the local historical society and the local historic architectural review board for the borough of Carlisle's historic district were involved in the consultation process. Both consulting parties issued letters or emails stating their positions or concerns, but did not choose to participate in meetings with the federal agency, local municipality, and SHPO. Mitigation for the adverse effect included consulting party review of the final design of the new construction and sharing of the National Register nomination form for the historic district with the Historical Society for posting on their website. The needs of all parties were considered, and reaching resolution and outcome was satisfactory to all participants. This slide and the following one show the impact of new construction on the streetscape of historic districts. In this project on Butler Street in the Lawrenceville Historic District in Pittsburgh, local consulting parties included Preservation Pittsburgh, and Lawrenceville United. Both organizations offered comments on the proposed demolition of a historic contributing building at this site and the design of the proposed new infill housing. The consulting parties reviewed the documentation provided on the current condition of the building proposed for demolition and on the difficulties posed by rehabilitation. After discussion of the financial hardship posed by rehabilitation, the consulting parties focused on the design of the new construction, offering comments and suggestions. While the construction design shown in the after photo of this slide is not the most sensitive and sympathetic design possible for the surrounding historic buildings, the local consulting parties had the opportunity to offer comments that were taken into consideration by the developer. As proposed by consulting parties, the new infill housing matches the setback of neighboring historic buildings, and the new buildings have some brick on the front facade and a similar arrangement of stories and window bays to better fit into the historic streetscape. Compare the new construction shown on this slide to the previous slide. This streetscape view is just a few blocks from the other. Soliciting and considering the feedback of consulting parties can result in a more sympathetic new design that better complements the existing buildings. Good design is a win-win situation. Vacant lots are gone and the streetscape is revitalized, making the whole neighborhood more inviting and tax generating. The new construction here fits the streetscape. Same size, scale, setback from the street, materials, and fenestration pattern. And the new buildings complement the Second Empire style of adjacent houses in a more thoughtful way than that shown on the previous slide. Sometimes input from consulting parties, like the SHPO or a local group, can introduce ideas or requests that others closer to the project might hesitate to voice. Experts in the preservation field with experience from other projects might offer suggestions of other successful approaches to similar situations. Ideally, consulting parties all share the same desire to make sure that the final project is the best choice possible to meet the project and community needs and serve preservation interests as well. All demolition of contributing buildings in a historic district requires consulting party coordination, even when the project is not controversial. This project to replace these flood-prone buildings with an expanded green space and public park was much supported in the community. None of the solicited potential local consulting parties elected to participate. The consultation was still required with the SHPO, federal agency, grantee, and local municipality. The nature of the project meant that the mitigation discussions had to address how to integrate this newly expanded open space into the historic district. The SHPO, the HUD fund recipient, and the municipality consulted on how to best address that adverse effect in a mitigation agreement. Markers to highlight the history of the community and the historic district will be placed in the park as an agreed-upon mitigation measure. Mitigation is intended to benefit the community and the historic district, and that's why local input is so important. Who knows better than the community what those who live there would most appreciate? We will take a question break now.
Thanks, Pamela. I do not see any questions that have come in through the chat box right now. We are about, 20 minutes into our presentation. So just a reminder, if you do see something that you want to ask a question about, just type it in the chat box and we'll read it at the next break. And as just a reminder, this is being recorded. So if you feel like you can't quite keep up with everything and think of questions all at the same time, you can watch this later and certainly get in touch with Pamela with any questions. We'll have her contact information at the end. So Pamela, since I don't see any questions, why don't you keep going into the next section of the presentation?
Thank you, Shelby. And I hope the reason there's no question is that we have just made everything so crystal clear and all of our computer issues have been ironed out so that you can actually see what we're talking about. Now we'd like to give you a few tools to help you understand how to carry out the consultation process. You should have received a copy of this sample consulting party solicitation letter. This invitation to participate as a consulting party for a specific project can be sent via regular mail or by email. Be sure to send a copy to the SHPO to document your efforts. This sample text contains the suggested language to explain to potential consulting parties why you are contacting them and what their role would be in the process. The consulting party invitation should include the project name and address and description, a brief explanation of the Section 106 process, including their possible role as a consulting party with an interest in the project, a description of the potential effect of the project on historic properties, contact information for future correspondence, and a set date requesting a written or email response to the invitation to consult. Typically, this invitation to serve as a consulting party should be sent to the local or county historic preservation group, adjacent property owners, those with a preservation, legal, or economic interest in the project, and regional heritage or tourism representatives. Main Street or Elm Street organizations, or even merchants organizations, may have a vested interest in the project. It is important to note that you are soliciting comments from those with a legal, economic, or preservation interest in the project, not just those with a historic preservation perspective. If you need help identifying historic preservation interests in your community, you can contact the SHPO, as we maintain a list of such organizations by region and can offer suggestions as to which local preservation interests should be contacted to participate in consultation. Be sure to request a response in writing within a set time period. You should allow at least 15 days for a response to the solicitation. Retain a copy of the response or lack of a response for your files. You may also call to follow up with those invited to consult to request a response in writing for your files. Your email or letter documents your efforts as the federal agency to invite consulting parties and satisfy the Section 106 responsibility. If there is a demonstrated local preservation interest who would like to participate in consultation, it's important to ensure that they are part of the dialogue to consider ways to avoid, minimize, or mitigate adverse effects to historic properties. The best dialogue is often an active one that takes place in a meeting format. The SHPO advises 15 days notice for meetings, and the invitation can be emailed. Be sure to include the SHPO office on the meeting invitation. For convenience, and certainly in our pandemic times, phone conference calls or Skype or Zoom meetings are a convenient way to conduct a consultation party meeting. Here is a sample agenda for a consulting party meeting. The federal agency conducts the meeting. Introduce all consulting party members. The SHPO or the federal agency can explain the Section 106 consultation process if those participating are not familiar. State the project need and purpose. Identify the historic properties that will be affected by the project. Discuss and evaluate project alternatives and options and ways to avoid, minimize, lessen, or mitigate the adverse effect on historic properties. If the adverse effect is unavoidable, explore possible mitigation measures. Discuss next steps, which include the development of a draft mitigation agreement if needed for resolution of an adverse effect, and assign responsibilities for follow-up, and arrange additional meetings or correspondence. Complicated projects or ordinary projects with a good deal of public interest or even controversy can take longer to resolve through the consultation process and may require more than one meeting. That is why it is always smart to begin the consultation process early in the project planning process. The added stress of available funds about to expire can be avoided with good planning. This historic school, the William Penn High School in Uptown Harrisburg, is currently vacant and is a good candidate for some sort of redevelopment. It is located adjacent to a historic public park called Italian Lake, so two historic resources could be affected by a major project there. The school is architecturally significant, designed by Harrisburg's premier school architect, and it is a landmark in its riverside residential neighborhood. Many have graduated over its long history, so there could be a great deal of public interest in a project affecting this local landmark school. If a Section 106 consultation is required, it might be a project that would require a series of meetings and discussions to address both historic preservation and neighborhood concerns. Now let's look at a recent project where consulting party coordination played a significant role. Both of these vacant and neglected buildings were proposed for demolition and new construction using HUD funds. Their location in the recently National Register listed Waynesboro Historic District and status as contributing buildings meant that their removal would be an adverse effect on the historic district. While they were indeed in poor condition and looked far worse on the inside than this photo demonstrates, the Section 106 process required the federal agency or grant recipient to coordinate the consulting party process. Representatives from the SHPO, the borough, the planning office, the developer, the community's Main Street program all met via conference call to discuss the project. Project alternatives were discussed, and local insight into the issues was helpful in understanding community needs and desires, as well as project constraints. Remember that the consulting party process allows all perspectives to be shared, even those that do not favor preservation. Section 106 allows for the exchange of information and ideas among those with a vested interest in the project. Why is local involvement so important in the Section 106 consultation? The expenditure of public funds always requires ample opportunities to engage with the public. That is obvious from the emphasis HUD places on public notification in its grants process. But in the Section 106 process, the usefulness of public involvement and gathering multiple perspectives is more easily apparent since it is specifically project focused. It is in the best interest of the project and the public to allow multiple perspectives to achieve the best possible project outcome. Invited consulting parties may have more information about the past history or current challenges of buildings in the project area. Good background, regardless of the chosen outcome. Public involvement in the consultation process gives the federal agency or local administrator the opportunity to describe the intentions and benefits of the proposed project and to explain the alternatives explored. Discussing the backstory behind the currently proposed project with consulting parties allows for better understanding of all factors in the decision-making process. If an adverse effect cannot be avoided and an agreement is needed, local perspectives can lead to more meaningful mitigation measures that best serve the interests of the community. One form of adverse effect mitigation is input into the design of new construction. In this project in Waynesboro, after exploration of ways to avoid the adverse effect via rehab were discussed and deemed financially unfeasible, feedback on how the design of the new construction could best fit the historic district in Waynesboro was solicited. Next slide, please. The SHPO and others shared ideas on the most sympathetic design for the new construction that fit within the project budget. Via email exchanges, SHPO staff pointed out the noticeable characteristics of this block of the historic district: a common street setback, front-facing gables at the roof line, and front or side porches. The photo on this slide highlights the porches and front-facing gables, key characteristics of the neighborhood. The developer was encouraged to create a new construction design that incorporated those elements, and this photo was shared via email to encourage the development of that design. Historic preservation professionals and others can offer good advice about thoughtful project design. Sometimes it is in the community's best interest to have an outside group push for design concessions. As part of the consultation process, consulting parties offered comments and the developer responded. This slide shows the preliminary design for infill housing and the SHPO suggestions. The developer was very on board with designing infill housing that blended into the historic streetscape. The design proposed had the right size, scale, and setback from the street, all appropriate for the setting. The developer also addressed the desire to include front-facing gables and a front porch in the proposed design. Architectural historians on the SHPO staff made suggestions to refine the design, such as the removal of stone panels adjacent to the front door, since that treatment is not seen elsewhere in the historic district and would make the new house stand out and look obviously as a new construction. The developer noted that losing that stone feature would be a cost savings to invest elsewhere in the design of the building. The SHPO staff also suggested alternative treatments for the area under the gables, perhaps a decorative window or fish scale shingles as seen elsewhere in the historic district. At the end of the consultation, agreement was reached on the design of the infill construction, and the drafting of an agreement to resolve the adverse effect could begin. I am not certain that these non-human primates have reached consensus, but they certainly seem to be getting along and working together for a common goal. I had hoped to find a good online image showing a group meeting to illustrate this webinar. My first few efforts produced only photos of people from exotic locations far from the United States that did not seem especially applicable. When I modified my online search to Group Meeting USA, this is what popped up. It's always fun to enjoy the miracle of the internet. So maybe these non-human primates were employing the tips on this slide for effective group discussions. The keys for a successful and efficient consultation process are clear communication of both the project's purpose and need and the preservation concerns, allowing ample time for all consulting parties to present their views, identifying shared interests and objectives, and remembering that all share the goal of producing the best possible project outcome. Sometimes the 106 process allows the community to ask for more than they might have without the consultation process. We are going to conclude the presentation with a step-by-step explanation of how projects with consulting party involvement typically flow.
Pamela, could I
Yes.
actually break in here with a few questions before we get to that next bit?
Okay.
We
I
had
think you
some,
just want to give everyone a longer opportunity to enjoy this great photo of the non-human primates.
maybe that is it. But I wanted to break in and get to these questions now to make sure that we have time to cover them, and also because in whatever kind of weird cosmic bubble is happening where I am right now, I can no longer type a response in chat. So I want everybody to know that we've seen their comments. So here is our first one. There is a vague requirement on who to consult with. Is there guidance on this requirement? Is this something you can speak to, or are we going to cover that a little bit more later, Pamela?
Well, I would say we've already covered it, and we will be talking about it again later. But really, you're required to think who might be interested in the project in your community. If your community has a local historic preservation organization, you should contact them. If they do not, you might reach out to the county historic preservation or historical society office. You can always ask the SHPO for guidance if you are wondering if just who would be the appropriate consulting parties to invite to a consulting party meeting. Sometimes organizations you might not think of could be appropriate, such as like the Lincoln Highway organization, or others who are interested in travel and tourism, if your project happens to be just along their route. You should also invite anyone who has a local perspective that's worth hearing in the consultation process. The neighbors who have a concern about how this project would hopefully benefit their property would perhaps enjoy the opportunity to respond either in writing or by participating in the meeting. Neighborhood groups might have a strong opinion about what is proposed for that site. Anyone who represents if it's a downtown project, there might be someone who represents the Main Street organization or even the Chamber of Commerce. And as I mentioned, you're looking for people with a historic preservation interest initially, but really anyone who has a legal or economic interest in the project. And many times they do not elect to participate in consultation, but the requirement to reach out to them and issue an invitation is part of the adverse effect process. If the project does not have an adverse effect, you would not be required to document these efforts. But if you are demolishing a contributing building in a historic district, that's when you need to start thinking about who you need to invite to a consulting party meeting, even if it does end up being just you and the borough or township and the SHPO office who end up participating in consultation. I hope that answers it.
And this is Barbara. I would add to that when we are reviewing a project that you send in and we see there's a potential for an adverse effect, we will typically include a list of local preservation interests that we are aware of in our response letter to give you some guidance.
Thank you, Pamela and Barbara, for answering that question. We have another one here from Matt, who asked, must the consultation invite be mailed out registered or return receipt?
That is a good question, because neither of those things apply. All you need to do is send an email and copy the State Historic Preservation Office or me on that email to document that you are reaching out and this is the method you are using. Because email is so much faster and more efficient, I would say every adverse effect consultation process I have participated in, all the invitations have gone out via email. So no need to be sending registered letters to anyone.
Okay, great. And then we have one last question that came in here. It's a bit long, so I'm going to read the whole thing. How must a grantee let the public know of a proposed project? Demo ER clearances are often done with a tiered review, which only requires a published notice when the Tier 1 is conducted. If the 106 form from the SHPO indicates no impact, what notifies the interested public of the demo project?
I'm trying to think how to, if the demolition does not involve a historic property, the consultation process, the adverse effect is avoided, or there is no adverse effect, and the consultation process is not necessary. HUD has a number of requirements for notification of the public of the carrying out of project, or at least program activities. The only time you are required to solicit public comment is when there is an adverse effect. In theory, as we mentioned about how the consultation process can occur at any point in the process, you could choose to notify neighbors or organizations routinely of demolitions as part of your effort to seek consultation, but the SHPO will only require that you provide documentation of your efforts to identify consulting parties when there is an anticipated adverse effect on a historic property. I hope that satisfies that request.
Thank you, Pamela, for that. I just want to point out two comments that came in response to Matt's question and your response about the consultation invite and how it is sent out. Russ made the point of using the read receipt tool for emails and then print those out and add them to your files. So that is one way to create a record of your consultation. We have another comment that just came in that says, provided the recipient allows for a read receipt to be sent, may also use the delivery receipt. So there's a couple of different tools if you're using Outlook for your email as a way to create your record of reaching out to those consulting party groups. So with that, Pamela, thank you for indulging that break for questions now. Why don't you get started again with the last bit of the presentation?
Absolutely. I'd just like to say that in your invitation to consult, you should request a response, even if the response is, we don't care and we don't want to participate. We are eager to see the demolition of this property. We have no concerns. Whatever response they care to share that includes not choosing to participate would be helpful to have a written record of that. So in your invitation, you should request not just that they respond to you within 15 days, but that they respond to you with a written comment as to their desire to participate and any concerns they have with the project, because then you have the opportunity to print out those responses and make them part of your record, just as Russ suggested. So let's hop back into the steps. We're almost done, everyone, in case this starts to feel like you've now thought about this far more than you ever wanted to. So we're going to conclude the presentation with a step-by-step explanation of how projects with local consulting party involvement typically flow. Please note that the federal agency is responsible for most of the steps. Step number 1. The federal agency prepares a project submission to send to the SHPO for review. Step 2. If there is a potential for an adverse effect finding, or if there are concerns about the possible location of as yet unidentified historic properties in the project area, the SHPO will request that the federal agency invite local consulting parties to participate. Step 3. The federal agency identifies possible consulting parties with assistance from the SHPO if requested. Step 4. The federal agency sends out invitations to potential consulting parties requesting response within a set time period. 15 days is customary. Step 5. The federal agency notifies the ACHP of the adverse effect finding and solicits participation. Usually ACHP does not choose to participate, but they must receive project documentation online using their E106 documentation system. The link to that system is provided in this slide. Once the consulting parties have been identified for the project, this is step 6, by the way, even if no one elects to participate other than the federal agency, local government, and the SHPO, a meeting or conference call can be scheduled. In these COVID times especially, meetings are usually conducted via conference call or Skype. Once the issues have been explored and discussed to all parties' satisfaction, it is time for the next step. Step 7. If the adverse effect is unavoidable, a mitigation agreement will be drafted. The SHPO can provide advice and formatting for the nature of this agreement. All parties must agree on the measures included before signatures can be sought. This could include the exchange of multiple drafts of an agreement to make sure that the language is acceptable to all signatories. Once the agreement is finalized, this is step 8, it must be signed by all signatories with a role to play in the mitigation. Everyone who participated in consultation is not required to sign off on the agreement. Only those entities that have a responsibility laid out in the mitigation agreement must sign it. Once finished, or once executed, a copy of the agreement must be sent to the ACHP. And at that point, the 106 process is complete. The only outlying responsibility is the satisfaction of the mitigation measures. And once those have been carried out, proof should be sent in to the State Historic Preservation Office via email for their records and also for your own. The next slide shows the typical time frame to complete the consultation process for an adverse effect project. About 3 months from start to finish is a fair estimate to accomplish all the steps. Controversial or complicated projects may take longer, and simple projects could be completed a bit more quickly. As you can see, allowing ample time in your project schedule to complete the consultation process is advisable, since each required step takes time to complete. Environmental review is most effective and least stressful when carried out early in the project planning process. Let's take another break for questions now in case you've thought up anything since the last batch.
Nope, we do not have any more questions that have come in through the chat at this time. So I think we can move ahead.
Okay, this is Barbara. We wanted to let you know that in 2021, probably in February, our office will be changing how we carry out consultation with agencies and applicants. So rather than using email, we will be corresponding with you through an online data management system called PA SHPO, which stands for Pennsylvania's State Historic and Archaeological Resource Exchange. And that will be the SHPO's enterprise-wide, spatially enabled cultural resource information system. It's going to replace CRGIS for those of you who are familiar with that, and our other independent databases. And we anticipate it will launch to all users in February. And we're going to be offering training opportunities, and we will notify DCED when they become available. And we're going to try to tailor one of the trainings specific to HUD and DCED projects, so hopefully that will be more meaningful to you. In the meantime, we'd encourage you to follow our blog and sign up for our newsletter to receive updates on PA SHPO's development, its benefits, and other important information as we continue to count down to launch. And at the request of DCED, we are planning another upcoming technical webinar in May. That one is going to be on, actually, I think that's incorrect. That one's going to be on demolition and adverse effects and alternatives analysis, some of which we touched on today. That will be in March. And in June, we'll be discussing the treatment of historic buildings in National Register listed or eligible historic districts. So the intention of these trainings is to provide you with the tools that you need to make sure you can carry out your 106 responsibilities. If you have suggestions for other training topics, please let us know. There are previously recorded webinars available at these links. There's one on overall, one on Section 106 consultation, and one that we did in September on the Historic Resource Survey form. So feel free to follow those links, and this training will also be available in the future.
All right, thank you,
And I don't
Barbara.
think we have any.
Oh, no, I was
Questions?
just saying we don't have any more questions right now at this time. And it looks like we do have a few more minutes if anybody wants to send any in through chat. Here is the contact information for Pamela and for Barbara. Certainly, Pamela went through a lot of really great information today. Sometimes it takes a little while to digest that. You would have received a copy of these slides in the email reminder that you got from me yesterday morning. That email also had that sample consulting party text in there for you to copy and paste and use for your own projects. But certainly reach out to Pamela if you have any questions about this presentation or where to find that YouTube link for today's recording. So I did not see anything else come in. So I think anything else from you, Pamela?
I would just thank everyone for joining us today and for your indulgence with some of our glitches with our computers and online systems here. But mostly I would like to wish all of you a safe and happy holiday season with the hopes of a far less worrisome time in the year ahead. You are always welcome to call or email me with questions about the webinar and other preservation concerns. Please stay well, and best wishes to all of you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.